Viruses have been here far longer than us. Over billions of years, they've evolved to coexist with their host species. The danger arises when a virus leaves its natural host and jumps to a new species that has no natural immunity, like us.
We know that there are around 200 viruses that infect animals that can jump into humans. And that might sound like an alarming number, but the really alarming number is that there are at least 500,000 more with the potential to make that jump, and we know almost nothing about them.
In 2018, members of the World Health Organization met to discuss this problem: how to protect the world from a deadly pathogen that hadn't even been discovered yet. They called it Disease X. Disease ecologist Dr. Peter Daszak was on the panel.
It was WHO that came up with this phrase, Disease X, to really make the point that we think that the next pandemic will not be a known pathogen, it will be an unknown disease.
And of course, they were right. Just 2 years later, COVID-19 gripped the world. It emerged from wildlife, jumped to people, and then spread like wildfire. COVID-19 is Disease X. But it's just one of many.
It's a common misconception that this is just a rare single event that led to this pandemic. Even though we're in the throes of this pandemic, there are new viruses spilling over into people somewhere on the planet that could lead to the next one. Unless we completely change our business as usual on the planet, pandemics will continue to emerge.
We don't know the pathogen that will cause the next pandemic, but we can figure out where it might be hiding. Dr. Daszak's team analysed the causes of previous outbreaks to come up with a map that shows where the next one might emerge.
What is it that makes bits of the map yellow?
Well, what the map reflects are places where there's high population density of people. At the same time, it reflects where wildlife are and where the changes that drive emerging diseases happen, like land use change.
Since 1970, the number of people on the planet has doubled. And over 1 million square kilometres of forest have been cleared to make space.
Pandemics originate where there are lots of people interacting with diverse wildlife populations and encroaching into them, building roads into forests, putting up farms. Real hotspots are in Central West Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, including China.
China has an abundance of wildlife. It's home to 14% of the world's animals, 1.4 billion people, and a booming economy that's driving massive land use change. In the past decade alone, 1 million kilometres of new roads have been built. But China is just one of many places that COVID-19 could have come from. A future pandemic may be lurking in any of these hotspots.
So here's what we can do. We can go to these hotspot regions. We can do things like discover the viruses that wildlife carry. We can focus our energies there and try and stop them emerging.
Monitoring just one of these hotspots takes a huge amount of resources. And to prevent a pandemic, you'd have to be monitoring the right one at the right time. But scientists are trying their best. Across the world, virus hunters are working on the front line, discovering unknown pathogens and working out how they're transmitted and trying to stop them.
So actually here we run a bacteriology laboratory, but at the moment we've dedicated to doing COVID research diagnostics for the hospital.
Really?
Professor Stephen Baker spent 5 years in Vietnam hunting for new viruses. His team closely monitored over 1,000 people who were the most likely to be infected.
We recruited a cohort of people that were working with animals. So these were wildlife traders, farmers, veterinary practitioners. So this was a woman that actually worked on a farm. We would get samples from them, so we'd take samples from them to try and identify what was making them sick. Then we sampled their animals too, in here where they're seen sampling the pigs, to see whether we can identify any potential transfer of viruses between the animals and themselves.
The idea is to get one step ahead of an outbreak by finding unknown viruses before they find us.
There would be people farming other types of animals which would be considered to be more exotic, such as porcupines, even rice field rats, bamboo rats.
They found 4 new pathogens that had jumped from animals to humans. Thankfully, none of them sparked a pandemic. Meanwhile, 1,500 miles away in Wuhan, another pathogen was waiting to emerge.
Obviously, you learned a huge amount in Vietnam, but we've still had the coronavirus pandemic. What's the value of keeping doing this kind of research?
So we're in a better position now to understand this process than we were 20 years ago, than we were 5 years ago. This is the way we learn. This is the way science works. The events of the last 3 months have highlighted that this work is incredibly important. It just shows how quickly these things can emerge. If we'd have been doing this in China at the time, then it would have been enormous insight into how these things emerge in real time, right at the beginning of the pandemic.
As we start taking tentative steps out of lockdown into the new world the pandemic is creating, we're waking up to how vulnerable we are.
It's only 16 years since SARS. It's a few years since Ebola in West Africa, H1N1, Zika. They're coming thick and fast. This pandemic has reached every country, every population. I think people are waking up and seeing the connection between their own personal health and things like the wildlife trade and deforestation that drives this. And I really think that future generations will look back on this time as a critical moment when we did actually wake up to the threat and do something about it.
Science is centre stage like never before, with politicians all around the world telling us they are guided by it at all times. But that implies there is a single scientific solution. But listen carefully to the scientists, and you'll hear them wrapping their answers in uncertainty, reminding us of how much we still don't know, that science doesn't trade in absolutes and rarely gives a black and white answer. Science can't weigh up the trade-offs we have to make. It has no moral compass. But when its limits are understood, it's the most powerful tool there is to inform the decisions we face.